All right, so in today's video, we're gonna talk you guys through how you can start to gather a little bit more information about your wrist, self-assess your wrist, get a picture of your baseline, and kind of get a general idea for what normal mobility might be in your wrist and how far you might be from that. Always keeping in mind that the amount of range of motion that you need versus the next person will differ depending on what you do with your body and on a day-to-day basis. But I know you guys at least appreciate having a general baseline or something to reference so that you know, because a lot of people, they don't know these things, right? Which I totally understand. Now, let's go over wrist extension and wrist flexion first. So you can assess this a few different ways. When you bend your elbow to 90 degrees, if you extend your wrist, so you basically try to keep this bone here flat and you test with your fingers straight how far you can go down into wrist extension, you want to see that you get in and around 90 degrees again on average, right? It changes from person to person, like I said, depending on what you do with your body. But if you go to extend your wrist and you're like here, you probably have some limited wrist extension. It might want to be something you want to work on. If you get down here and you're like, I'm pretty close to 90 degrees, you're probably doing pretty good, okay? But it's also worth keeping in mind the amount of effort required. So if you're like, I can get to 90 degrees, but I really have to work for it, again, that's an indication that you could probably benefit from some wrist work. So it's not just how far you go, but it's also the amount of effort required. You should have normal range of motion just accessible to you, right? You should just be able to move your wrists as far as wrists were kind of designed to move without having to really grind it out. And you can also monitor your fingers. So if you've got some tight tissue through your forearm, again, that goes down to your fingertips, you do a lot of gripping or a lot of typing or just a lot of activity and you carry a lot of tension in specific tissues that go to your fingertips, you might find you can get down here to 90 degrees, oh my goodness, but you're working really hard and or your fingers want to do this versus your fingers staying straight. So those are things to kind of look for that will give you an indication of like, should I maybe spend some time working on wrist extension? Now that's wrist extension in elbow supination. You can also test it the other way and go, okay, if I come up into, and I'll flip around here, if I come up into elbow pronation and then I extend my wrist, how far can I get here? Now, this one I would say is a little bit more, I don't want to say important, but a little bit more relevant for many people because many people are often doing things like push-ups or handstands or just things on their hands and knees, yoga, all sorts of things, right? So if you spend a lot of time in these positions, then yes, you should have 90 degrees of wrist extension accessible to you. And now this is just active wrist extension, right? So this is how far can I go actively? I'm going to come back to passive after, but you should have an active 90 degrees of wrist extension accessible to you there. And again, it shouldn't feel like a ton of work. When you get there, it shouldn't be like I'm straining, I'm working really hard. It should just be like, yep, there's my wrist extension, okay? Again, if you're kind of down here, you're quite far from 90 degrees, that might be something that you want to actually spend some time on. So as it pertains to wrist extension, in terms of how we can improve it, there's so many classes in OHF that will speak to that and we'll show you various different ways that you can actually start to work on wrist extension. I'm going to give you just the really basic bare bones version here, just for sake of examples. So I can see how far I can extend my wrist. I can use my other hand to take myself a little bit further, or I could use the ground, right? So I could come to the ground here and I could take myself a little bit further this way. Key difference here is that here my elbow's extended, so that would be like this. Here my elbow's flexed. Again, you might find that your wrist feels different or you feel a different amount of tension when your elbow's straight versus when your elbow's extended. I did that backwards. When your elbow's bent versus when your elbow's extended. So if you notice that one feels way tighter than the other, you might want to spend more time or you might want to start with working on the one that feels tightest for you. Bear that in mind. However, you could use the other hand to stretch it or take it a little bit past your active range and get into a stretch, or you could use the floor. Now, either way, you're going to get into your stretch, okay, whichever one works better for you or feels most applicable for you, and then you would hang out there and you'd spend about 2 to 3 minutes here, assuming you're not hypermobile. Then what you would do is you would do things like pails and rails, which would be trying to flex out of the stretch. So trying to come out of it and working all the stuff that's at length, but not actually moving at all. So you would just stay in this position the whole time. After you've done that, you would then reverse and you would think about trying to pull the top of your hand towards the back of your elbow, which would be considered rails. And that would be you trying to pull yourself deeper into a stretch. You're not actually going to move at all, nor is your hand actually going to lift, nor should it, because you're doing an isometric. But you would start with pails and rails, and you could start with a lighter intensity, so say 30 to 50% if you've never done it before, just to start to experience it, give the tissue a little bit of time to adapt, hold that for about 30 seconds going both ways, and then you can work your way up to max effort, holding that for like 10 to 15 seconds over time. Again, making sure that you keep it pain-free. Alternatively, you can follow along with the classes, right? But that's how you can start to work on improving wrist extension. Now, that's if you're stiff and if you're tight and if your wrist range of motion is limited.